Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of the one-shot entitled Something to Trust for the First Time. Here's the summary. "Who are you?" the man asked, abruptly, instead of answering Izuku's question. He put his hands on the bin's metallic edge and heaved himself out without waiting for an answer. As soon as his feet hit the ground, he swayed again, but managed to steady himself against the bin before Izuku could reach him to help. "You're the one who made the noise," he continued, frowning. He started to shake his head, winced, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "You woke me up." Izuku scuffed his feet. I don't think you're supposed to sleep in those," he mumbled, looking down. When Izuku finds an injured pro-hero on his way home, what else is he supposed to do but bring him back with him to offer him their first aid kit? "Deku, where are you shitty nerd? You're gonna pay for this!" Kachan's screeched words were followed by a rapid fire of explosions, and Izuku's heart jumped in his chest as he heaved, trying to catch his breath. Maybe he should leave. Keep running. This little alley had seemed like such a good hiding place 5 minutes ago, when Izuku had almost tripped headfirst into it. A good place to rest for a moment and try to figure out a way to escape Kachan and his band. Izuku wasn't foolish enough to hope that Kachan would give up, but the others probably would if Izuku hid long enough, and Kachan would have to go home eventually. "Deku!" The explosions rang louder, and Izuku stumbled backward, hugging the wall as close as he dared. Like this, he was mostly hidden behind some overflowing garbage bins, and he hoped Kachan wouldn't think to look too close. It smelled horrible, but if it got Kachan and his group to leave him alone for the rest of the day, Izuku would endure the gagging stench gladly. Besides, home wasn't too far from here, which meant that Izuku would probably be able to sprint home as soon as the coast was clear, and he wouldn't even have to find a way to explain new bruises to Kazan. "You think you're better than me? You shitty good-for-nothing useless Deku! Get back here!" Kachan snarled. "Maybe," another voice whispered, and Izuku's breath caught in his chest. "What?" Izuku didn't have to see it to know the way Kachan must have turned on his companion. "Maybe he got away," a third voice said uncomfortably. Kachan let out another scream of rage that made Izuku's chest hurt. Why? He thought. Why are things like this? His hand shook as he pressed his back harder against the wall, and his eyes stung. He didn't catch whatever else happened, but whatever was said, it seemed to convince Kachan to at least go look elsewhere. Izuku would probably pay for it tomorrow at school, but he didn't regret it. Not the hiding and running now, and certainly not helping that kid before. That hadn't been right. Izuku didn't understand how Kachan could sometimes be so awesome and yet so cruel. It simply wasn't right. Breathing shallowly, Izuku silently counted up to a minute, and then another, and another. After what he thought must have been at least 5, he heaved a great gasp, and his shoulders fell with relief. "I think he's gone," he mumbled to himself, hugging his backpack straps to himself. His voice shook a little, but he bit his tongue and strained his ears, looking for that telltale sound of explosions. All he could hear were distant cars and conversations. "He must be gone," he repeated quietly, bouncing on his heels. "He must be. Perhaps they went home? No, it's too early. Back to the park, then?" Izuku frowned and shook his head, tapping a finger against his chest. "Probably not. If that kid told his parents, Kachan might be in trouble. But he probably won't tell anyone, and Kachan would know that." Izuku gnawed on his lower lip absently, as he thought out loud before shaking his head again with a sigh. "He's gone," he repeated once again, willing it to be true. "They're gone. I can go home now." And he should, really. He had plenty of homework to do, and Pro Hero Overture had been fighting a villain earlier today, and Izuku was dying to watch the videos he knew had been taken of the incident. Her singing made the actual musical notes manifest as weapons she could control, and it was so cool. Swallowing nervously, Izuku finally pushed off the wall. He decided to stick close to the bin for a little while longer, even if the smell was worse the closer he got. The cover made it worth it. But as he stepped closer, Izuku slipped on something. The floor was sticky with some oily liquid covered in a multicolored film that shimmered, and Izuku would really rather not think about what it could be. And banged his elbows against the bin. A loud metallic clank echoed throughout the alley. Izuku's heart fell to his stomach, and his knees shook. For a moment that seemed to last ages, Izuku stopped breathing. He half expected Kachan to jump out at him from the shadows, vengeful explosions lighting his palms, but no such thing happened. What did, however, might have been even weirder. The bin started to groan and creak and echo, like something big was moving inside of it. Izuku almost fell over again as he hurried to scramble backward, but something stopped him from running away altogether. He didn't know what was happening, after all. He didn't know what was inside the bin, or maybe even who. Maybe they needed help. What if they were hurt? No, Izuku couldn't just leave things like this. And so, with a pounding heart, he waited. He didn't have to wait for long. With the loudest groan yet, the top of the bin shot up, hitting the brick wall with a reverberating sound Izuku felt in his teeth. It revealed a man, tall and dark and very disheveled. He looked disoriented, and he was swaying on his feet a little as he stood in the garbage. Izuku's heart lurched in his chest and his feet carried him forward. "Are you all right?" he blurted out. The man's dark eyes snapped to him. For an instant, Izuku could have sworn they flashed red. But then the man's hands flew to his head as he bent over in two and, from the sound of it, threw up all over what Izuku hoped was only the garbage, and not his feet. That didn't sound good, he offered with a grimace as the man stood back up, now paler than before. "Who are you?" the man asked abruptly, instead of answering Izuku's question. He put his hands on the bin's metallic edge and heaved himself out without waiting for an answer. As soon as his feet hit the ground, he swayed again, but managed to steady himself against the bin before Izuku could reach him to help. "You're the one who made the noise," he continued, frowning. He started to shake his head, winced, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "You woke me up." Izuku scuffed his feet. I don't think you're supposed to sleep in those," he mumbled, looking down. Was the man a homeless person? He kind of looked like one, Izuku guessed. But there was something about him that felt different. Too sharp, maybe, for that to be the case. He tugged on his backpack straps tighter. "Are you hurt?" Izuku continued. "There's a clinic not too far from here. It's closer than the hospital if you need help." The man grimaced as he aborted another headshake. "No hospitals," he grunted, and then, so low Izuku almost didn't catch it, "I'd never hear the end of it." Izuku scuffed his feet again. "Well..." He dared to look up at the man again, taking in his appearance. It was easier now that he was out of the bin, even though he was still tall enough that looking up made Izuku's neck ache. He looked hurt. Now that Izuku was closer, too, he could see how the man's clothes were ripped and torn in places, revealing, he thought, what had to be bloody wounds. It couldn't be good for them to have been exposed to the garbage either. Kazan always told Izuku he needed to clean his scraped knees when he fell, to make sure they didn't get infected. "We have stuff at home," Izuku blurted out. When the man gaped briefly, Izuku's cheeks burned. "It might help, and you can call someone to come and get you." "And take a shower," he didn't say. The man blinked. "Do you often invite strangers into your home?" he asked, sounding wryly amused. Izuku bristled. "No, but you need help, and I want to be a hero, and heroes help people, so I have to help you." Something flashed through the man's dark eyes, and his lips twitched. "All right," he said. Loath as he was to admit it, but Shota could probably use the help. His head was still pounding. He didn't remember hitting it, but it was sore enough that he probably had. And whatever chemicals were in that Quirk-induced smoke he'd inhaled had been strong enough that Shota still had an unpleasant aftertaste clinging to his tongue. It was lucky, really, that the villain had been more concerned with running than taking care of Shota. In his incapacitated state, Shota rather doubted he would have been much use in a fight. Unfortunately, it also meant Shota would have to start his surveillance and tracking all over again. But at least he'd be prepared for that Quirk next time. And hopefully, this close call had scared them enough to keep on the down low for a bit. Shota wished he had his phone to send all this information back to the task force. Alas, he remembered it breaking quite clearly. He didn't remember losing the pieces, but since his pockets were empty, he must have at some point. Not that it really mattered at this point, if anyone ever got their hands on those pieces and tried to get anything out of them. Shota wished them the best of luck. And a very resilient base of operations. "So, what were you doing there? You weren't really sleeping, right? And you aren't really hurt either, right? Because I don't think we have stuff at home if you have a head wound or something like that." The kid rambled, his demeanor all too bright for the circumstances. Shota just grunted back in acknowledgement, which, luckily, seemed to be all the kid required to keep going, now musing out loud about where Shota's apparent wounds might have come from. A villain with a porcupine quirk, the boy, Midoriya Izuku, as he introduced himself with red cheeks when he realized he hadn't. Shota didn't introduce himself back, but the kid didn't really seem to notice that. Had plenty of similar theories, which were kind of interesting to listen to. Messy and disordered, for sure, but the kid could probably have a future in quirk analysis, if nothing else. And then Shota realized he was absently treating the kid's nervous rambling as an essay he would look over. And he grimaced to himself, forcing himself to stop. "Did you get into a fight? Was that—" Here, Shota could see the boy's eyes widen as he almost started vibrating in place. "Are you a hero?" "Why were you there?" Shota interrupted, squashing the glimmer of guilt he felt as the boy's shoulders fell, and he shrunk in on himself. "Oh, He pulled on his backpack straps. "It was on my way," he said, eyes darting away. "I mean, I thought this might be a shortcut, but it wasn't." Shota hummed back non-committally. The boy was obviously lying. He was absolutely awful at it, which was honestly kind of refreshing. If he hadn't already determined that the boy was probably harmless, using erasure to make sure there was no shape-shifting or illusory effect had been painful but worth it. This would have done it. "I see," he said, but didn't add anything else. Judging from the kid's demeanor, he could hazard a guess at some type of schoolyard bullying. Shota could try to say something, but without knowing more, he doubted he could be of much help. Or that Midoriya would appreciate some stranger butting in. They walked the rest of the way in silence. From Midoriya's frequent sideways glances, Shota didn't believe the kid's earlier guesswork had been completely dropped. But he seemed to know better than to bring it up again, which worked well enough. The Midoriya's apartment was small, but cozy and clearly well lived in. It felt homey, and Shota's lips twitched up as he saw the boy truly relax for the first time. Whatever was happening with him at school, Home seemed to be a safe place for him at least. "Sit there," the boy ordered, pointing toward a chair before blushing bright red and backtracking. "I mean, you can sit there, if you want, or the phone is over there." He pointed toward the wall, where an older model Shota would bet had been there for as long as the apartment itself hung. "I'll be back with our first aid kit," he mumbled before dashing off in what Shota assumed was the direction of their bathroom. He shook his head to himself. That kid either had the best instincts Shota had ever seen, some kind of quirk maybe, or he was entirely too trusting. Knowing his luck, it was probably the second, too. Shota hesitated for a moment before sitting down. He should, theoretically, use the phone, but he was fine, really, and he would be able to make his reports in person soon enough. His head didn't even hurt anymore. He paused to test it for a second. Even using his quirk caused him no more discomfort than usual. Shota could leave. In fact, he should probably leave. But the kid had seemed so earnestly worried, and picturing his face falling if Shota vanished on him like a thief in the night made something twist in his stomach uncomfortably. Surely, lingering long enough for the kid to come back with his first aid kit couldn't hurt. He only regretted it a little when all the Band-Aids the kid could offer were All Might themed. All right, maybe a lot, but the kid had been so earnest, only faltering when Shota had stared at the dozens of tiny, grinning All Might faces staring at him. Why anyone would buy those was beyond him. They were more terrifying than anything else. It was fine, though. Shota could always take them off when he left. Nobody had to know. "Are you sure you're fine?" the kid asked as he walked Shota back toward the door. Shota stopped grimacing down at the All Might Band-Aids scattered across his arms. "Yes," he replied. When the boy only bounced on his heels, he sighed. "Thank you for the help," he added, the discomfort worth it for the way the boy lit up. "It was nothing," he mumbled, cheeks bright red, as he ducked down his head. "It wasn't," Shota countered. "You did something good, all right? Take pride in your accomplishments." He hesitated for a moment longer, before recalling what the boy had said earlier about heroes. He cleared his throat. "If you keep up that spirit, I'm sure you'll be a great hero." He meant it as encouragement, but Midoriya burst into tears. "I'm sorry." Shota sprung back, alarmed. Should he reach out, pat the kid on the back? Shota had handled crying children before, but usually not as a result of his actions. Or, well, not like this. He guessed some of his students might have cried upon being expelled. Before he had to make a decision, though, Midoriya shook his head, sniffling. No, it's not your fault. I just... Thank you." The tears redoubled. Awkwardly, Shota patted him on the shoulder. "You're welcome," he said. Midoriya kept crying. "I'm going to go now, if you're okay." Midoriya nodded rapidly. Yes, Ka-san will be here soon." "All right." Shota patted him on the shoulders. "Well, goodbye, kid, and good luck." He slipped through the door as quickly as he could, but not before seeing Midoriya wave after him, a fresh wave of tears pouring down his face. Shota hesitated for a moment, gaze roaming across the street, taking in the higher buildings and unlit street lamps. He could walk, he supposed, but... He unwound his capture scarf and threw it at the nearest lamp. This would be faster. He pretended not to hear Midoriya's impressed gasp at the sight and concealed his grin into the folds of his scarf. God, but it would need a wash. Eyes stinging from the pungent smell, he risked a look back and grinned harder when he saw Midoriya had stopped crying. All right, listeners, this concludes the one shot entitled Something to Trust for the First Time. Personally, I really like this one shot a lot. I think it was great. I think it was full of some humor moments. I mean, Aizawa being found in a dumpster, that's just hilarious. And Izuku taking him back and giving him band-aids kind of reminded me of the train, and where Izuku is really little in that one, and he's putting band-aids on Aizawa and rescuing him. And it's kind of like that reverse adopting trope, right? Where a kid ends up adopting someone else. And so Izuku and Aizawa meeting before Izuku goes to UA. I think that's really great. Aizawa, throwing out that casual, I think you'd make a great hero comment. And I think that's so nice. Izuku bursting into tears. And you get that awkward moment with Aizawa where he's like, I don't know how to handle this crying child. It's just great overall. The subtle way in which he shares to Izuku that he is a hero at the end without actually putting it into words. I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful fic. So I'd love to hear any thoughts or reactions you all had to this one. The fic is located on AO3, has definitely not gotten enough support over there. So if you have an opportunity, you should slide on over, leaving comments, kudos, support to the original author. I'm sure it's much appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.